Welcome everyone to today's Norms and Behavioral Change talk, which is hosted by the Center for Social Norms and Behavioral Dynamics at the University of Pennsylvania. We have the following agenda for today's Norms and Behavioral Change talk. We're going to start with a brief presentation by an early career researcher, Jordana Composto, from Princeton University, followed by our main talk today by Dr. Maurice Schweitzer from the University of Pennsylvania. And after both of these talks, we'll have a Q&A session that we'll moderate. So we encourage everyone, please feel free throughout the duration of today's talks to share any questions you have in the chat. To share a little bit more with you, for anyone who might be new to this series, this Norms and Behavioral Change talk series is organized by the Center for Social Norms and Behavioral Dynamics at Penn, in partnership with the Philosophy, Politics, and Economics program, and also the Masters of Behavioral and Decision Sciences program. And the center itself is a research center which works with institutions throughout the world in the areas of consulting, research, and training services for institutions and projects seeking to enact some sort of positive behavioral change. In terms of the remaining, so we're kind of like closing out our year right now. This is our second to last talk. Next month on Wednesday, December 4th, we'll have a talk by Dr. Iris Bonet from Harvard. And then in terms of our schedule for 2025, we'll be announcing that shortly, most likely by the time that we have our next talk in December. Another little heads up, and I see a lot of familiar names in our Zoom today. For those of you who were able to attend our Norms and Behavioral Change conference a couple of weeks ago, we're going to have the recording available shortly, within the next couple of weeks, I would say. So we'll be sending that out to folks as well. And yeah, just a couple of notes before we get started. Please kindly mute yourselves as the presenters are offering their talks. We'd love for you to keep your cameras on to have a more interactive discussion. And for any questions, again, please feel free to use the chat at any time, or when we have a Q&A, you're very welcome to raise your hand towards the end. And with that, we can go ahead and get started with our first speaker for today, Jordana Composto. So Jordana is a PhD candidate in psychology and social policy at Princeton University. She studies the socio-cognitive mechanisms that underlie collective and organizational change with a focus on the energy transition. And she uses a combination of experimental field studies, cognitive process tracing in the lab, and big data text analysis. Let me just stop sharing my screen so that Jordana, you can go ahead and share your screen. And as you do that, I'll share with everyone that Jordana's presentation today is on a process theory of norm information interventions. And with that, I hand it over to you, Jordana, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you all about this set of studies. I'm Jordana Composto. I'm a PhD student at Princeton, and today I'm presenting maybe a slight change to the title, a socio-cognitive process theory of norm information interventions. So some motivation that I don't think this audience particularly needs, but social norms, particularly norm information, are studied broadly across the social sciences for their effect on individual and collective behaviors and attitudes. Norm interventions, particularly norm information interventions, are often designed to change the evaluative significance of one attitude or behavior, typically the normative one, over another. What I am attempting to do in this set of studies is to examine the socio-cognitive mechanism through which norm information affects behavior, or in this case, policy support. In the package of studies, I'm investigating two different mechanisms, but today I'm just focusing on this norm as attention mechanism. So do norms function by drawing attention to the normative option? To investigate this, I turned to query theory, which is a memory retrieval process theory of often individual level decisions. So very broadly speaking, query theory finds that when an individual is faced with a binary choice, the choice that they think about first or attend to first is more likely to be selected for a few reasons. One, it tends to get more, just a higher volume of reasons why someone wants that to make that choice. And there are some kind of memory interference retrieval processes at play. So I've conducted 3 studies. There's a 4th in progress that all follow a very similar kind of query theory paradigm. First, we present each participant with a policy description. In study 1, that's a hypothetical policy. In all of the subsequent studies, it's a real policy. Then participants are randomly assigned to a treatment. They either receive a piece of positive norm information, negative norm information, or control. It depends on the policy. We, in the real policies, do not use deception, so we're confined by the norms that we can find out there in polling. After receiving that information, we ask participants to think about whether they support or oppose the policy and to type along all of the thoughts that go through their mind as they are deliberating. So participants on average list 4.5 reasons, and they can list up to 20. We only have a few people that have a single thought. After that, they answer our main outcome variable questions. How much do you support or oppose the policy? After that, they are re-shown each thought that they listed in their deliberation, and the participants categorize the thought as either being a support increasing or a support decreasing thought. And then they answer their demographic questions. So in study 1, we, in this hypothetical policy, we give them either a no norm, no information control, a positive norm, or a negative norm, and investigate the effect on these different cognitive mechanisms. First, we find that in the support norm condition compared to the opposed norm condition, participants list a higher proportion of support increasing thoughts. So when you see that most people support this policy, you yourself generate more reasons why you support the policy. We find a similar effect on order. So SMERD is our order metric. It stands for the standardized median rank difference. In short, a higher SMERD is associated with these thoughts occurring earlier on in the thought process. So when people are shown a support norm, they list reasons why they support the policy earlier on in their thought process. Next, we use a mediation analysis to investigate this mechanism and find that thought order and thought content partially mediate the effect of norm treatment on policy support. Here I'm showing you the combined process metric, but we find that effect when we individually investigate the two mechanisms. In the next study, we manipulate that mediator. So now we say we tell the participants which thoughts, which option to think about first. So in this case, they receive a negative norm piece of information. So in that case, the natural order would be to think about opposition thoughts first. So we replicate this finding that when participants are going through the natural thought order, we find this effect of norm information on policy support. But when we reverse the order, so when we give participants a piece of negative information and then say, think about reasons you support the policy first. Okay, great. Now think about reasons you oppose the policy. That effect goes away. So we have some evidence that this attention mechanism is driving that effect. So to summarize, we do find some evidence that for this norm as attention mechanism. We think that norm information affects policy support by directing participants' attention to the normative option first. In the studies I didn't show you, we found that it worked for positive norms and for negative norms, so it works in both directions. A caveat to this finding is that in the real policy scenarios, when participants are skeptical about the norm information that we show them, we don't find any effects. We don't find effects of the mechanism or of norm information on policy support. So a few boundaries to our findings there. And then I think I'll just leave norm as information as it is. And I will wrap up by just thanking my advisor, Elke Weber, and my collaborator, Aya Salim, my research assistant, and my funders. And you all for listening. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Jordana. And what I'll say to the group is that I see some applause in the crowd as well. Thank you so much. And what I say to the group here today is that if you have any questions for Jordana, please feel free to place it in the chat and we can come to it towards the end of today's session. And with that, let me just once more share my screen, just a second. So we can move now into our main talk for today, which is going to be by Dr. Maurice Schweitzer. Maurice is the Cecilia Yen Koo Professor of Operations, Information, and Decisions and Management at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, where he studies negotiations, trust, and emotions. He is also the academic director for Wharton's Effective Decision-Making Program, the director of the Wharton Behavioral Lab, and a past president of the International Association for Conflict Management. Let me stop sharing my screen so that, Maurice, if you'd like to go ahead and share your screen, that would be great. And in the meantime, I'll share with everyone that Maurice's talk today is on the following: how preferences for benevolence and integrity change across relationships. And with that, I hand it over to you, Maurice. I think you're just muted at the moment. So if you want to go ahead and unmute. There you go. And thank you so much, Maurice, for joining us, and I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Samira. And Jordana, what a great talk. It's hard to follow. What I'd like to do is share some ideas about benevolence and integrity and how our preferences for these two values change as we consider different relationships. And this is work with Emma Levine, Alex Moore, and Josh Lewis, where we began to think about the tension between benevolence and integrity. And, coming from, say, if we think about a hierarchy, the kinds of relationships we have with our friends may be very different than the kinds of relationships we have with leaders, and we're looking for might change as a result. So here, sort of, we'll start off with like an example. Imagine you're thinking about submitting work to a journal where there are rules where multiple extensions aren't allowed. Now, this happens to sort of all of us, and this happened to one of my co-authors, Emma, asking for an extension. Now, in general, we're the ones sort of asking for extensions, but imagine that you're the editor of the journal. If you have this rule and somebody has a good reason for asking for an extension, should we grant it? And what I want to think about is that granting it and violating the rule would be the benevolent thing to do. That's kind. If we adhere to the rule, that's following the rules and keeping things fair for everybody else. That's high integrity. And what I'm suggesting with this example is that there's sort of many cases when we tell pro-social lies, for example, we're trading off between benevolence and integrity. And in fact, when we asked people to sort of think about a lot of different cases, benevolence and integrity dilemma is really quite common. When I say benevolence, it's the idea that we're concerned and we like to see the welfare of others improved, whereas integrity, we're adhering to universal principles in some impartial manner. So we're just adhering to sort of key principles. We're not giving anybody preferential treatment. So you can see how benevolence and integrity might conflict. And in fact, we find is they conflict quite a lot. So we talked about enforcing rules. We talked about pro-social lies. You can about sharing difficult truths. Will we punish people? How we allocate rewards? Should everybody get rewards equal to what they did? Or if somebody's in need, would we be more attentive to them? When we asked in a pilot study, we asked people to sort of describe some of the dilemmas that they face. Benevolence and integrity dilemmas are actually quite common. So people, when we coded these dilemmas, they were about 27% of what people said. Of course, the most common are these sort of right-wrong dilemmas that are important, but not, I think, is psychologically interesting. I think psychologically that utilitarian deontological dilemmas have actually received more attention, but I think this benevolence integrity dilemma is actually more, potentially more common, or at least as common. So here's like an example, I had to decide whether to tell my boss about the money I'd seen a coworker and her friend take from the register. She is or was my friend, and I knew about the hard time she was going through and really needed that money. I had more loyalty to her, but could not see myself as letting that happen. I had to tell someone. So here's like an example of this benevolence integrity dilemma. So the benevolent thing to do is sort of, support a friend who's going through a hard time. The high integrity thing to do is to report taking money from the register. Okay. So that's what we mean by benevolence and integrity. You can sort of see these two pieces here. Okay. So when we think about how to resolve this and what kinds of relationships do we want partners to be high in benevolence versus integrity? And of course, we want them to be high in both, but often these two principles conflict. And what I want to suggest is that we prefer benevolence when that person's going to be benevolent toward us. And that's going to be more characteristic of friendships. And we want high integrity when we're concerned about being mistreated relative to others. So in some cases, we'll want, for example, a leader to be higher in integrity than benevolence. When we think about what's likely to influence these concerns, we're looking at the group size. So larger size groups are going to guide us to prefer more integrity. When we think about closeness, so how close our groups are, there we like benevolence. And hierarchy, when people have more power, integrity is likely to be more important. And so we're looking at the sort of size, closeness, and hierarchy to characterize the relationships we have with other people. And we identify this sort of size, closeness, and hierarchy through a lot of sort of analyzing prior work, but also surveying people how they perceive the relationships that they're in. And we think that these three dimensions are likely to be pretty important for how people perceive the way people resolve these dilemmas. So here's this idea. We're going to think about how intergroup features influence moral preferences, depending on the kind of relationships that we have. I'll show you some data sort of suggesting that both sides, all three, size, closeness, and hierarchy, really matter. So first, we're going to test the full sort of model. We surveyed 500 people, and we looked at small and large groups, so dyads, just two versus groups. People who had they were close to, that is an emotionally close relationship, or somebody that was distant, and somebody who is higher or equal to them in a hierarchy. So in this procedure, we had them read about this, what benevolence and integrity is, and think about various workplace relationships. And then we had them judge their interest in a partner who was high in benevolence versus integrity. So here's how we introduced it. We said, many common ethical dilemmas involve a trade-off between benevolence and integrity. Here's what benevolence is. It entails wanting to help or do good to other people, whereas integrity entails adhering to universal principles in an impartial manner. So benevolence and integrity can conflict in the workplace. For example, professionals frequently face situations where they have to choose whether to help someone, prioritize benevolence, or apply rules or principles in a fair and impartial manner, prioritizing integrity. These situations, for example, can arise when allocating rewards, punishments, and tasks. So that's what we introduced. And then we described the relationships where here, for example, in this case, this is an equal and a close and a dyad. So an equal with whom you have a one-on-one relationship, that's the dyad. This person does not work closely with any other colleagues. You're an emotionally close but not romantic relationship with this person. So that's the sort of the equal close dyad, and we varied all of it. So here we said, here's an equal with whom you work in a group of 5 people. This person also is close with several other colleagues in your group. You're an emotionally close but not romantic relationship with this person. And then here's what the whole thing looks like. So we can think about, you are not emotionally close to this person, suggesting greater distance. So this is how we manipulated sort of the nature of the relationship. And then we asked, how strongly do you prefer a person in this role that relies on benevolence versus integrity? And here you can see in this dyadic relationship, we see a big difference. So in the dyadic relationship, if this person is close, then here this is a preference for benevolence. And if it's distant, you prefer that they privilege integrity. We find a similar pattern for groups. And some pattern when we look at hierarchy, but here you can see it flips. That is, when this person has more power, then we really prefer integrity sort of across the board, but particularly when they're distant, that is not emotionally close with us. Where the concern here is that somebody with more power may be more likely to advantage others at our expense. And so here we're sort of testing this Size-Closeness-Hierarchy. We study them across every different combination. And we find that moral preferences depend on what kind of relationship we're entering. So that's the key idea here. And when we think about friends and leaders, we see this as opposite ends of some continuum. That is, our friends are dyadic. We have a close emotional relationship with them, and typically in a one-on-one relationship. Leaders have more power in groups, and their integrity is the principle that we would want them to privilege. So, of course, we want people to have high benevolence and high integrity, but as these relationships change, our preferences change. And I think this is one reason why, as people move up in a hierarchy, so they move up from being a colleague to a mid-level manager, maybe they're a department chair or a senior manager, they need to change. And to be effective, to be credible, they have to demonstrate higher integrity and perhaps less benevolence as they navigate naturally occurring dilemmas. In study 2, we focus on friends versus leaders. So here we had almost 200 people that participated. We just had 2 conditions, looking at benevolence, basically behavior that privileges benevolence or privileges integrity. They engage in a writing task, reported essay exchange, and then a leadership election and judgments. Here's a writing task. We did this in the behavior lab, and people write some essay. So they're asked to imagine, sort of a workplace dilemma, and resolve this bonus allocation dilemma. So I'll read it. I know it's kind of hard to see. So the purpose of the study is to explore different workplace dilemmas. Imagine you're employing a medium-sized sales company. You were recently asked to manage a team that participated in a company-wide sales competition. Your team won the sales competition, was awarded a large bonus. You were responsible for allocating the bonus across your 10 team members. Managers typically allocate the bonus equally to their team members. You must decide how to allocate the bonus. You know that a child of one of your employees was recently hospitalized. The family is experiencing financial hardship and would really benefit from a higher bonus payment. The whole team knows about this as well, but it's not clear whether your teammates sympathize with this employee. How would you allocate the bonus and why? Write in enough detail so the person reading this essay can understand your thought process. This essay may be shared with other lab participants. You'll have 5 minutes to write this essay. Okay, so here's the stimuli. And then what we did is we had research assistants write out by hand, answers to this prompt. Half the time they prioritized benevolence, giving more money to the employee in need. And half the time they prioritized integrity, giving money equally to every member of the team. Okay. So that's what our research assistants did, as they drafted handwritten notices like this. Now, importantly, the participants in the lab they wrote about a very different dilemma that wasn't a benevolence integrity dilemma. They just wrote, about some other dilemma that had nothing to do with benevolence and integrity. And then they were told they were going to exchange essays. And after they had written about their essay, then they got another handwritten essay from somebody else. It turns out we fed them all one of two versions of this essay that they got. Okay, so it felt to them quite credible that somebody else had just done this. And then we asked them, okay, now there's a leadership election, you're paired with this person. Do you want this person to be a leader in your group? And they were more likely to want this person to be a leader when they had privileged integrity over benevolence. When we asked them if you want this person to be your friend, they were more likely to identify this person as someone they want to be friends with when they had prioritized benevolence over integrity. So that is, whether or not this person in this dilemma had prioritized benevolence or integrity, guided their preference for this person to be a leader or a friend. And then here, this sort of leadership election, they're sort of allocating points using a paradigm that some other scholars have used. And we find just, confirming the attitudinal results that I just shown you before. So again, if somebody prioritizes integrity, they seem like the kind of person you want to have as a leader. And it sort of replicates this in some other follow-on studies too. So we did this in a negotiation study, a truth loyalty dilemma that's similar and sort of aligns with benevolence integrity, and also sort of open-ended descriptions of friends and leaders. Okay, so the short idea is people prefer benevolence in friends, close, dyadic, non-hierarchical relationships, but they prefer people who are going to prioritize integrity in leaders that are distant, group-based, and hierarchical. Okay. And the sort of broad idea is that the moral preferences that we have, where we want people who are high, of course, in everything, but throughout life, we've got to make choices. And the moral preferences that we have change as a function of the relationship that we have with people, right? So of course we want people to be high in benevolence, and of course we want people to be high in integrity, but when people have to choose between them, the one that they privilege is important to the relationship that we have with them. Okay, I'll show you another slide. We looked at closeness in particular. Here we recruited 200 participants, and we had people contrast a potential leader who has a friend or doesn't have a friend in the group. And what we're looking at here is if somebody is benevolent, but they might be benevolent to somebody else, I think that's what's most concerning. So that was our sort of thinking, was that what we're really worried about is if there's a really benevolent leader, they might be really benevolent to somebody else, but not me. And that's, to ruin the surprise, that's what we find. So here we had people arrive in groups and indicate a friend. Then they read about this benevolence and integrity dilemma, and they sort of rated themselves. They learned about a group game, and they learned about potential leaders, and they actually choose a leader. So it's a little bit involved. And so here's the idea that they're a member of the group, picking a leader sort of in this group. And what they have is they can all contribute money. And whatever money they contribute gets tripled as it goes to the leader. So it's sort of like a trust game, but this is in a group. So each person, each member here can kick in $2 to the leader, that triples to 6, and then the leader decides how to allocate it. And here's the idea: that is, if you think the leader is going to have a high integrity, are you going to be more trusting? If they privilege benevolence, are you now worried that if they have a friend in the group, they're not going to be as generous to you? They might privilege their friend. And here the leader has to give away the money. So here, what you know about this person is they reported they rely more on benevolence than integrity. Candidate B, they rely more on integrity than benevolence. How strongly do you prefer candidate A or candidate B to be the leader? And then we added, candidate A is not friends with any other person in the group and reported they rely more on benevolence. So here, when they don't have friends, what do you prefer? And here, when they do have a friend, so here they're friends with another person in the group that is not you, reported they rely more on benevolence than integrity. So how do you think of this person when they have a friend in the group? Okay, so here, if they don't have a friend in the group, it's sort of close to even, but still you prefer benevolence. But if they do have a friend in the group, I'm sorry, you still prefer integrity. So like, again, you still prefer integrity, 5.6 out of 10. But if they do have a friend in the group, now you really prefer integrity. That is, you're concerned that they might privilege another person is higher. So we always want leaders in a group to have high integrity, but particularly so when they have a friend in the group. So you can think about, as a leader, it's important to demonstrate integrity, particularly when you have friends in the group and other people know that. So here, how concerned are you the candidate would treat you worse than others? And this is what we're sort of like worried about. And so that's the mechanism that we're finding support for. Those people are concerned that they're going to be mistreated relative to others. So here we're finding in study 4 is that closeness between group members influences concerns about relative mistreatment. And this influences preferences for benevolent versus high integrity partners. That is, what principle are people privileging? And again, there's these moral preferences. That is, the moral preferences in others depend on the features of the relationship. And it could be features of the relationship outside of your dyadic relationship, but features of the broader relationship structure around you. That is, if somebody else has a friend in the group, that could influence the moral preferences, the moral preferences you have for how they're prioritizing benevolence or integrity. I'll show you another slide looking at sort of group size. And here we just manipulated sort of dyads versus groups. A very similar kind of pattern, sort of design. They read up benevolence and integrity and rated themselves. They were placed in dyads versus groups for a social dilemma game, and they learned about the benevolence and integrity of potential partners when they make these choices. So here, at the beginning, they're like, candidate A answered the previous questionnaire, but anything they would resolve dilemmas by relying much more on benevolence than integrity, or they rely more on integrity than benevolence. So they sort of read the description of these and indicated what they relied more on. And then here, like a standard trust game, they could pass money to this person and sort of, what do you do? Versus it's part of a broader group. Okay. And here again, that is, here, when it's just a dyad, just you and another person, benevolence is now more important. But when it's a group, now we're seeing integrity is more important. So as groups get bigger, people are prioritizing integrity relative to benevolence. And when we looked at this, as the group got bigger and bigger, we saw this, sort of, trend roughly continue. Okay. So in short, we find that people prefer high integrity partners when they expect to interact with groups relative to dyads. And this moral preference depends on features of relationship. Again, in this case, like the group size, it seems like going from 2 to 3, which is interesting because a lot of the management literature is really focused on, and in psychology too, like how dyads are sort of a very different kind of relationship, and groups have to be 3 or more. And it does seem as if going from 2 to 3 actually is a pretty big jump, at least in our domain. Okay, so we think size, closeness, and hierarchy each independently influence the preference for high integrity versus benevolent partners. And by high integrity and benevolence, I'm talking about what people are prioritizing. And this lines up with friends that are a small relationship that is dyadic, emotionally close, and equal. In those relationships, we want somebody who prioritizes benevolence. But when we go to larger groups, it's less emotionally close, and this person is high in the hierarchy, that it has more power. That kind of leadership relationship, there we want somebody who prioritizes integrity. And these effects are driven, at least in part, by concerns about relative mistreatment. And I think in terms of contributions, one is to think about, benevolence and integrity dilemmas. That is, we think about, trusting people based upon their ability, benevolence, and integrity. And we've, I think, in a blanket way, sort of thought about, we want people high in everything. But when people have to make choices, what happens? And I think what's interesting is we care about different relative moral values depending on the relationships that we're in. Okay. There's Alex, Josh, and Emma who did all the work. All right. Let me get that consumption.
Great, thank you so much, Maurice. Sorry, I just was looking elsewhere. Excellent. So with that, what we can do is we can turn to the group that we have. All of you here, if you have any questions, please feel free to kind of raise your hand and you can go ahead and speak up. Or if anyone wants to, I see Christina has a raised hand. So Christina, please go ahead.
Yes, Maurice, you are becoming a philosopher.
Christina, from you, that's high praise. My colleagues here, I don't know if that would be good news.
And I have a question. It's very interesting, first of all, but I think we should not discount the role that information plays in our choice between benevolence and integrity, because it looks as integrity completely discounts personal information. Whereas benevolence, and it is not by chance that in a dyadic group, a group of friends like I know you, there is a preference for benevolence because I have an enormous amount of information about you. And so it would be improper not to use this information. When it is a group, instead, typically, we don't have enough information about all the members of the groups, etc. The idea of the group, there is basically lack of information. And in that case, of course, integrity would be preferred. Now, what I was thinking, and the same for a leader, better a leader without friends, because he knows a lot about them, but he doesn't know about us. And so may have, a preference for helping his friends, etc. Now, I wonder if it would be interesting to do an experiment with different type of information conditions. So playing with information, okay, and so maybe even in a group and even in the choice of a leader, think that if this leader has very particular information about each member of the group, is not a friend of anyone, but knows very well the condition of everyone, then maybe benevolence may be preferred in the leader more than integrity, you know, because the leader has no friends in the group and knows exactly the situation of each member of the group. I don't know. I mean, this is a suggestion.
Yeah.
What
So-
I would ask.
Yeah. So first of all, I love that idea. So I think you're sort of highlighting in part a limitation of the work that we did. It was impossible. We ran many studies. We find very consistent results, but it's an impoverished setting. That is, these are all sort of like as if we're entering into new relationships, or we don't know people very, very well. And you're right. That is, how might this operate with a richer, more naturalistic context where we know information about people? And it could be quite different. My intuition, my sort of guess is, I mean, what we sort of find is that people are concerned about being relatively mistreated, and that concern gets triggered as soon as you go from 2 to 3. So I have a relationship with Jordana, and that's great. As soon as I'm also in a relationship with Ryan, now I'm worried. And I think what's interesting, I mean, this is sort of like going a little bit further afield, but you know, the scholarship on jealousy requires people define jealousy with respect to relationships. That's triadic. I think, I mean, but taking a step back, I mean, your point's exactly right and extremely well taken. Yeah, as soon as, you know, once Yuri knows me, maybe, or he knows something about my condition, maybe I have the view that he's going to look out for me. Maybe, but my intuition is that as soon as we go from 2 to 3, I think something psychologically, like a flag goes up in our minds that we're worried about relative mistreatment. And
I agree, but you know, you see, benevolence cannot exist without information. Because
yes. So
while,
you're right. So
while integrity must exist, must eliminate information in some sense. Your idea that, and I agree with you, when you go from the dyad to a group of 3, people may prefer integrity exactly because you have a lot of information about, let's say, Jordana and Gary. But at this point, you know, what does benevolence mean? Your weighting of Jordana's situation versus Ryan may be different from mine.
Yeah, that's right.
That's why we want integrity. So there is a mixture of having information and then how to parse this information, basically. Okay, so I have information about you and somebody else. I'm friend with both. I will have to make a choice and I will choose one. And then you want me to be impartial. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I really like that idea. Yeah.
But I think I would play a little bit more with information because I think that's the interesting thing. Benevolence cannot exist without information.
Yeah.
Be benevolent without knowing the situation of the people, while basically this impartiality, integrity is total impartiality, you know, must think of Kant and what Kant wrote. It was horrible sometimes because you have to discount even the personal information that you have, etc., etc. But I think I would play a little bit more with play with information and the information you have and see if people make exactly the same choices.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, I'm loving.
Thank you, Christina. Other questions? There's a question in the chat, but let's turn to Uri. Uri, please go ahead.
Thanks. So thank you so much for this talk. So this was very interesting. I have a question about judgment of people's behavior. So do you think that like judging people in different scenarios as being like if you see a leader being benevolent and not showing integrity, do you judge them differently than if you see your friend behaving in the same manner? So essentially whether moral judgment will be also, so there's some work on kind of relational norms. But what do you think about like, and this could also explain like the pressures that people feel like when they behave in these kind of environments.
Yeah, so that's great. So that to me, I mean, Christina's question's good, but harder. Your question is good and easier. So a nice direct follow-up would be, yeah, how do we judge? How do we judge a leader or a friend who's now making these decisions? And I have strong intuitions about it. I think it would line up again in line with sort of concerns about being, mistreated. That is, you want a friend who's going to be benevolent, and you want a leader who's going to be acting with high integrity, unless if that leader's acting benevolently, when they're acting benevolently to you, that might be okay. But I wonder that is still, you might be worried. That is, if there's a leader that's acting benevolent to you, I think that might make you anxious too, that, maybe, Jane is like privileging me this time, but man, I've got to work to stay in her good graces because, oh no, she might like Pooja more next time. Right. So like, I think that's the, but I really like that. I mean, I think there's a lot to play there, and to me that's I think that's sort of a rich direction and something that's a little bit easier.
Yeah.
Easier to sort of play around with.
Great. Thank you so much. There was a question from Pooja in the chat, but I think she has to leave now. I see a hand raised from Dawn. Dawn, please go ahead. I think you're muted, Dawn.
Great. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much for the talk. It's very interesting. I have, through the discussion, especially the second discussion, I actually have a bit a different intuition in terms of seeing a leader to manifest benevolence in front of a large group. So one thing I was thinking about through your talk was whether there's some kind of idiosyncratic when this kind of belief is towards subjects, in a sense that if it's me worry about I'm mistreated as a group, as I'm judging a leader in a large group, I guess the integrity, well, one reason I think about, I would also expect to see integrity because I'm worrying if there's a high chance of well, if the leader manifests benevolence, then I might expect next time he will trade off my benefit by being benevolent to some members, right? So there's a cost in play of this kind of understanding. However, if I also see a leader manifest benevolence towards some members, then I also appreciate this kind of humanity in this leader. Then also imagine next time when I'm in a hard time, perhaps he will give me a pass or be gentle on me. So I wonder. So I had this kind of conflicting understanding by imagining me as a subject in your study in terms of reporting what I expect a leader to, whether towards more integrity or benevolence, or sometimes it seems to be conflicting. So I wonder if there's any subject show this kind of tendency in your study.
Oh, that's interesting, right? So one thing is that I'm showing you averages and sort of like general trends. But if I'm understanding your question, Don, that it could be that maybe you want a leader who privileges benevolence when you're concerned that you might need that extra help. Right.
Yeah.
So if you're the one with a sick child who's facing financial hardship, maybe now you really want that benevolent leader, right?
Well, sorry, I'm just jumping. Well, but that's also where my question about idiosyncrasy plays a role, right? Then in that situation, by seeing the leader being benevolent to other team member, it gives information about
Yeah,
the
right.
leader.
That's right. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So I mean, I think this is coming back to Yuri's question that as you know, like we could try that out. So we could describe people as leaders, and see how they judge people or how they, you know, like depending on your situation.
Mhm.
You know, and it could be, I mean, so the findings that we have, and I think this is a little bit related to Christina's point too, that is, it's very austere. That is, we don't have a rich, developed, long-term relationship. There isn't, it's sort of information poor. What these results really suggest are, I think, sort of two things: how people relate to new relationships, and two, that these differences exist across relationship. There's you know that it isn't that we always want a high integrity person or a high benevolent person, that our preferences can change. I think those are the two lessons I'd sort of draw from this. And I think what you're pointing to could be interesting moderators where our relative preferences could change. So given backgrounds, given existing relationships, the relative preference for integrity or benevolence could change as a function of our situation, a function of other information that we have, a function of our understanding of, like, you know, more details about where they privilege benevolence or integrity. Right. So yeah, my student privileged Yuri because he had a sick child. Well, I also have a sick child, and maybe I like that act of benevolence, right? It's interesting. It's an interesting question. I think there's a lot of richness that we could add to this.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Don and Maurice as well. Turning back to the group, any other questions for either Maurice or Jordana? Maybe not, unless there's, Jordana, please go ahead.
I'm currently formulating a question, which is my hesitation. But the two strands of questions are, if you think that the kind of friend in the group role, do you think of that as an imbalance in information about the groups, or are you would you also think of that as the explanation that you were giving is like, well, I know this person really well, so of course I know this person, of course I'm going to prioritize them. But in the explanation you just gave, which is kind of what I was wondering as you were giving your talk, is there something about need-based and the desire to improve group equity in it's kind of the equity equality distinction, I don't know. I'm curious if you have just thoughts coming out of all of your studies about maybe how those different goals for the group might play out with this benevolent integrity dichotomy.
Yeah, Jordana, how interesting. I think when you have a friend in the group, I mean, there are other moral principles like loyalty, that may get cued too. And one of the key mechanisms that we were playing around with here was this concern about relative mistreatment. I think that's really this hot button concern that people have. That is, in a relationship, I'm okay being treated equally, I'm very worried once I'm getting mistreated. And I think that's a place where we're very attentive to concerns about that. So I think that's where having a friend, like when I know that you have a friend in the group and I'm not that friend, then I think I'm much more alert to what's happening and what could happen than if it's just a dyad, or I know you have such high integrity, just, you just see people. But so that's sort of like where I'm thinking about this. But I think your intuition's right. That is, it could be richer, and there could be more that's happening here when we have a friend in the group. Yeah, and Jordan, I was going to ask you about this sort of these norms. That is, in your talk, basically, once you see the norm, then people are more likely to sort of, earlier and more often sort of cite congruent ideas. And we were saying with the query theory that they're retrieving it more fluidly from memory, right?
Mhm. Yeah, and
That's
yeah,
right.
the key is the congruent ideas, not the norm itself. So that's why the second mechanism I didn't talk about is if that actual norm information explicitly enters the thought process, and it almost never does.
So it's not a norm. So it's really just like it's the congruent ideas.
Yeah, yeah. The memory literature kind of breaks down that like memory searching process into posing queries to yourself. So if it's a policy choice, the query would be, do I support the policy? Or why do I support the policy? And then maybe the second query would be, why do I oppose the policy? But that's a question. And so then your memory kind of, highlights these different aspects that would support or, would kind of fall into one bucket or the other. So the theory that we're putting out is norms kind of determine query order. So rather than kind
Yeah.
of that random assignment, really starting with the normative, evaluating the normative option first, which gets more information. But the norm really only enters the thought process when it is surprising to people. Having read through myself like just 10,000 aspects, it's usually like, I wonder why people oppose this. It's not really it's not really entering as like I support it because everyone supports it. Like that's, I think, as norm researchers, like that's kind of helpful to have validated a bit, because I don't think anybody thinks that's how it works.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Very, very nice.
Great, thank you both so much. I'm turning, any last final question from the group? I feel like we might have covered it, so we can start to wrap up. Just want to express deep appreciation to both Maurice and Jordana for your talks today, really compelling talks today. And as we wrap up, I'm just going to share one last slide for everyone that please keep an eye out for our next and final talk for the year, which is going to take place on Wednesday, December 4th. It'll be with Dr. Iris Bonet from Harvard, who is the co-director of the Women in Public Policy Program and also professor of business and government. So we'll be sharing more details about this talk and also our 2025 talks through our listserv and also our social media handles that we have. So again, Maurice and Jordana, thank you so much. And we can wrap up for today. Thank you everyone for participating and hope you all have a lovely day. Thank you guys.